Hi guys, and welcome to a new episode of Hit Your Numbers. This week we have an extra special show with Jon Billett. If you don't know Jon, he's the author of Story Quadrant, and he's also the go-to expert that's going to help you create memorable and impactful stories to tell your customers. Jon has also worked as a storyteller at Salesforce, and he's now delivering storytelling masterclasses, and you can attend one. His next storytelling masterclass comes to London, September the 18th. Visit Jon's LinkedIn for more information. Oh, and he's also a member of the Magic Circle, and this event in London just happens to be at the Magic Circle headquarters. So if you want to learn how to become a great storyteller, listen to this episode and then find Jon's LinkedIn. Enjoy the show.
All right, Jon, look, really looking forward to our conversation today. Big fan of the book that you wrote. And just before we kind of jump into that, I guess, let's give the listeners just like a high level overview of who's Jon, what are you up to these days? You know, what's your kind of journey been to date?
Sounds good. Thank you very much, James. Right, so let's keep it brief as I can. So I've been working in tech for probably about 30 years now, or just under. I was at a company which most people will know called Salesforce, and I was there for about 10 years. I was in the sales organization there before switching into the enablement part of the business before ultimately creating the company Story Quadrant. I wrote a book about this framework. And this is actually the second book I've written on this type of subject, and is now a full-time job. My full-time job is running masterclasses and private sessions and running short keynotes for tech companies mostly, although I have recently been starting to move into even manufacturing and insurance. So it's an interesting world that I live in for sure, and it's basically all about stories. How do you articulate the value of your product and service and the differentiation elements to your prospects and your customers?
Love that. Yeah. So, and you mentioned differentiation there. Like, that's such an important thing for sellers to nail today because, like, don't get me wrong, like some industries have been hyper competitive for a really long time, right? If I think about my days at BT, you know, hundreds of thousands of competitors, but then you look at, you know, some kind of new category startups. There was only a couple of people doing performance management when I was building that team, and now there's loads. And I guess that's come from AI. It's making it easier for companies to start, technology companies. So, you know, how important is differentiation and being able to tell that story in 2025, Jon, from your perspective?
Well, I think this really is interesting, right? Because the more I get involved with differentiation especially in a crowded market, it's not only the products and services that differentiate, it's the story, it's how you interact. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's how you play with people's attention and how much variety and how much novelty you can bring into that interaction, that story, and that presentation with your prospects. But from a differentiation perspective, it is key to try and spend some time as an individual and figure out, you know, what is it that truly makes us different? What are you gonna miss out on if you buy a service from somebody else? And I think that is, we don't really spend enough time thinking about what that set of differentiators is actually, what they truly are.
Yeah, and I don't know if you see this, but I see this a lot. I saw this a lot when I was going into new roles and building teams, and I see this a hell of a lot now going into organizations and helping them run skill development programs. And they have like differentiation statements, but I always ask myself, like, so what? Like, why does that even matter? People come up with differentiation, but they think it sounds clever or it sounds cool, but prospects don't care about that. They care about something else. Do you see that a lot?
I do see that a lot. And again, it's we can maybe dip into one area, which I kind of realize this is an area that we don't always give too much thought to. Well, one is your differentiator absolutely, you're right. Is it so what? Is it going to make a difference? Do they actually need it? Do they want it? Is it going to create any value? But I realized actually one of those, when you plan those, that narrative, one of the best and most logical ways to start the planning is for understanding the trends that your prospect or your customer is actually facing, or the industry, and then link everything back to the trend. So if you know that for me, in my world, the trend which I see everywhere is that attention spans are dropping. They're dropping rapidly. And even if we look at the attention span of an average adult in the year 2000, it was about 12 seconds. In the year 2017, it dropped to 8 seconds. So we know this trend is happening. Now, we can't do anything to change that. But what I can do is I can help you work with it. by creating stories and structure and visuals and presentations that actually do work with that reducing attention span. And therefore, once I then plan my positioning story framework at that point, I know if I start with a trend, what are the pains caused by the trend? And then what is the hook I can then quickly throw in to make you realize that I can actually probably really, really help you here. Then go into the differentiation, then the value, the evidence, and then the future state. So it's a very well structured flow before you even get to the differentiator to make sure the differentiator is actually going to have meaning to your prospect. And ideally, you go through this exercise quite frequently. If you're switching industries or switching significant of a different customer, run this exercise so you know by the time you get to hit your differentiation to actually are meaningful and the prospect's going to actually benefit from them.
100%. So I guess you see a lot of people that raise differentiation at the beginning of, say, a discovery call or in a demo, but they don't actually build up the so what, like why we did it this way. We could have done it this way, but we believe deep down at our core that this is the most optimal way to do it. Your peers seem to feel like that as well. That's why we've done it this way. This is why you should care. And this is the differentiator, like almost like teeing them, like priming them up for it.
Priming them. And this is the beauty about starting a story with a trend. It's if you can get, and the one I use as an example quite frequently, and if I said it, have you noticed it's becoming harder and harder to get people engaged in content when you're presenting to them? That's what I'm looking for. So this is the trend, and you've just nodded, right? So I've got a few of these that I always use because I want people to agree visually that this is something they see. Right, okay. And you know what? The worst thing is, if they're not listening, you're not going to be remembered, What if I can make your presentations 1,000% more memorable? And then we can go into it, right? And I see this too frequently where you dive in and without really giving consideration to, otherwise you've then got to backtrack. Once you backtracked, and if you think about it, the interaction you'll have with another human being, you'll be categorized in one of four ways, probably within a tenth of a second of meeting them. And we know from an entertainment perspective, Netflix data shows that you've got to really grab somebody's attention with content within 90 seconds. Otherwise, you risk losing them. And that data is actually now being sort of trickling into cinematic releases as well. It's changing the way we consume content. And actually, this grates on me so much when I see presentations that don't lean into all of this data that we got. We worry about maybe the wrong thing sometimes. And I posted online on LinkedIn only about a week ago. What is the point of using AI to generate a presentation if we're not going to worry about the delivery of that presentation? We're making the wrong problem faster. And maybe it's time to just stop and think about how do we actually want to deliver this in a way that's really going to grab the attention and be remembered before we even start to plan what those visuals look like.
Yeah, 100%. I think let's get into the different kind of stories that sellers can tell and I guess that realization moment. But just before we do that, when I'm teaching to improve the conversion from discovery to demo, or let's say we know there's going to be, a big group of stakeholders involved in a decision process. If I want to get more people involved, I have to share content that's going to hook them. Otherwise they're being asked to come into, 9, 10, 15, 20 engagements a quarter. And the way I kind of explain it to sellers is whenever a really good movie comes out, there's usually one reason, why you go to the cinema to watch it is because the trailer fired you up. They spent good quality time and effort making that trailer hook you to come to the cinema, right? And the ones that don't hook you, you go, look, it's kind of interesting. I'm a bit busy, so I'll watch it on Netflix in 2 years. Yeah.
And the second wave of that is the recommendation from somebody else, right? So somebody else has seen it, and then it was the trailer, it was pretty much the whole story, or you've really got to see this. And this is one of the things that I find really interesting with stories is if you do a presentation or you tell somebody a short story or they watch a short story, then they're asked to explain that story to somebody else. The second time it gets repeated, it gets longer.
Yes.
That's interesting, right?
Yeah.
So so you don't need to be really verbose and go into so much detail because the next person will do that for you. Yeah. So the clarity with which you can set your message, set your story, as long as it's easy for them to remember, when they retell it, it will get more detail.
Yeah.
And that's for me, it's just, why wouldn't we use this more to our advantage?
I know. And we're going to get into it for the listeners, but I guess what you're also saying there is help the prospect see themselves in the story so that they can then go and tell that value story to other people. And when they see themselves in it, they start to use emotion because it's their story, right? And it's no longer you selling and telling the story. It's a peer that's passing on an experience with a positive outcome, hopefully, that ties back to business metrics, which we're all taught, right? Everyone's trying to teach medic these days. And we know the first letter is probably the hardest to really, really nail. But if we can get that and feature it in some kind of story, and then we can enable that person to go and tell that story, we're not doing the selling anymore. We're actually enabling our champion to go and sell. So I don't know if that, aligns with your...
It absolutely does. So there's two areas where that is. So there's different story types. We'll touch on those, I'm sure, as we go through this. And from a success story perspective, that uses a very different structure than one I've previously briefly mentioned. But if you're telling a success story to a prospect, it's important for your prospect to be able to see themselves in that story. That's where relatability and relevance is important. And you only get that by doing good discovery.
Yes.
Well, that's absolutely 100%. Now, the second thing, I'm going to veer off a little bit because one of the things you said there it triggered off. I thought it was a good time to make this point. We only get now apparently around about 5 to 7% of the time during a sales cycle, right? I think that's about the figure, face to face with a prospect.
Yeah.
They can do their discovery. They've got user groups. They can do an awful lot of research on a vendor before you actually engage with the prospect. So the cycles obviously happen a long time before you're engaged. Now, if it is only about 5% of the time, I think during that entire selection process is only about 17%. You have to check the figures on this, but I think it's only about 17% of the overall process is spent with all the vendors collectively. If you can spend even 1 or 2% more face-to-face by getting in front of them, even the old I'm in the area, fancy meeting for a coffee type thing, using some of those old tools to get in front of them, apparently that doesn't impact the overall percentage. It just means you get the lion's share of that percentage. That's something to absolutely keep in mind.
There's something I will add to that because I don't want to lose a train here, and I did think we were going to digress pretty quickly, which is good. But there's two things that I wrote down there when you were speaking. So the first is, I think this is why cross-functional alignment's critical in go-to-market. So if sales have got great stories to tell that have probably come from customer success, or some of them have come from customer success, and then you've got the different ones that we're going to jump into, the different types. It blows my mind how few marketing organizations are involved in the creation of that. So case studies then tend to suck because most of them lack outcomes, and they're usually very cookie cutter. The second thing that ripples off of that, and this is something I realized when I was a VP buying data for my team, is I went inbound with Zoom Info, and they called me when I was on the thank you page. And they have this thing inside where in their business where if you don't call an inbound lead within 60 seconds or 5 minutes, you're taken out of the inbound lead flow for I think 30 days. I don't know if that's still the case now. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it's because that Gartner, I think, found there's this huge drop off in conversion based on the time of you not contacting an inbound because they're probably going inbound with other people. So when you were talking there, it reminded me of something that I also teach, which is speed to differentiation. The speed of when I can start to influence decision criteria. And that could be on a thank you page. That could be on as soon as somebody comes inbound or as soon as I book an outbound meeting, I share some resources that starts to feature our story and it features our compelling point of view and differentiation. I start to rig the game and make it really hard for other people to influence.
Yeah, and I got a feeling that same report from Forrester or Gartner talked about the speed, the importance of not only the speed to follow up, but the personalization as well.
Yeah.
And the coupling of those two things happening within 24 hours of a contact, the win rate, likelihood of a win coming from that increases by a staggering amount.
Yeah. As soon as I kind of saw that stuff years ago, I built up all these workflows. So as soon as an inbound lead came through, it just lit up all the dashboards, sent Slack notifications to me and the reps so that we jumped on it because we saw the same. We started to influence decision criteria, when we're selling HR tech. And anyway, we digress. But
I want to go back to the first point that you made there about the success stories.
Yes.
And I do spend time with solutions, with sales, and with marketing teams. And success stories are an interesting one because if you ask most people what types of story do you want to tell, the answer quite frequently is one of two answers. One of the answers is success stories. And success stories are massively valuable assets, right, across the entire cycle of a customer opportunity, because it's, it will build, marketing can use it to, build demand and get people really interested in it. You can share it during a sales cycle to give confidence that you've done this before, and even to cement the decision at the end. Other people have done it, and here you go. So these are really, really valuable assets throughout the entire sales process. However, most of them aren't stories. And it's like, it's not a story. What is it? Well, the case study, what was that? Was a slide that's got a ton of information on it, that have got some facts around a company and maybe a logo of the company and a picture of the person involved, but it's not a story. And this, again, bothers me because it is incorrectly using the word story to describe something that actually is just a bunch of facts. So this is what we've been doing more and more of lately, is taking data, press releases, and case studies from companies and reading them and extracting what's important. And this is not using AI, it's using an author and actually writing a story. And quite frequently now, I think we've done 20 of these recently. The story goes back written just in a Word doc, which then gets a voiceover actor recorded and then placed in with the A reel and the B reel over the top, and then placed in an LMS for not only for sellers to watch and learn. And I always encourage people to, if you've got video stories, or if you have got some stories in your sales organization, watch the videos, read the stories, and the ones that actually make you feel something, those are the ones you've got to learn and tell in your own voice or share. And I think that's important, to create your own small library, the story, your go-to stories. And actually, the go-to stories I had at Salesforce, I still have to this day, and I still use some of them. And it's not necessarily about the product; it's about the impact that technology has on a developing country. They stick.
1,000,000%. And let's park the implementation part, because I do want to come back to that, because I think we're both also aligned on, one and done training doesn't work. You mentioned there, like, put the stories in and then practice them. If you give somebody a story and then it's like when people onboard reps, here's our product, here's a quota, here's Salesforce, go hit a number, we know how that usually ends up, right? So I do want to come back to that, because I think a lot of people are going to start to get some real value from what you're saying. And the next, what we want them to do is leave today with at least some actionable tips on, okay, I can go, I need to practice this, or, I put it in, like you said there, LMS, and then do some readiness assessments before we get sellers to go out and tell these quote unquote stories. What they're telling now aren't typically stories. They're just, as you said, case studies. But you mentioned like Salesforce, and then you worked at some other organizations as well, John. Like, when was that aha moment when you realized that, hey, if we actually teach and enable our sellers to be able to tell these different types of stories, we can actually really improve sales effectiveness? Was there like a aha moment or light bulb moment when you saw this come together?
Yeah, and it was, I was thinking about this. It was vividly when I came to realize, let's take a step back a second. There was a lot of advice being given, and there still is the same advice being given by maybe senior leaders, I don't know. And it's basically tell more stories. And that bugged me, because it was like, well, that's great, but it's vague, it's kind of unhelpful, and it didn't show me how to do it. So that's where I then started to learn all about the different structures of stories. And I realized that actually most people were being taught story arcs, specifically the hero's journey. Even I've had a conversation with somebody about this recently. I realized that at that point, it just wouldn't fit. I thought these they obviously fit. They work for books, for films, TV shows, but they don't fit the typical sales process. That's when I got a pen and a piece of paper and I started drawing all of this out. Then that for me was the aha moment, and it was on the back of it. Well, it's not a napkin, it was a scrap piece of paper, and I got it out in front of somebody, and I was like, drew this and I explained it. And that was when I realized that it isn't one size that fits all. You need to have different story structures based on what you're trying to achieve. And that was the moment. And that was several years ago now, when I realized that I'm trying to shoehorn this one story type across the entire, and it doesn't work. And that for me was the moment. Then I thought, I need to understand how all this comes together. That's where the framework came from.
Got it. So would you say that's like one of the biggest mistakes that you saw then, or you still see today, is reps trying to use one story type for every part of the either marketing awareness set, like AE doing like new logo acquisition, and then maybe CS doing expansion or retention. They use the same thing over and over again.
They use the same. So one of the issues is, we consume content. If you look, I always try to make references to other pop culture references, and if we look at how movies have changed over the last 50 years, they were very slow. 50 years ago, actually, it's Jaws' 50th anniversary this year. If you think about how they used to start, the expositions were very slow, very gentle, like Jaws and The Shining. It was all about building like the atmosphere and building all of this up before we go into this really long, drawn-out series of stages in a story. You compare that with a most recent James Bond movie, right? It's very different, right? The credits are buried partway in, they're shorter, the action happens. And why? Because we're changing. We expect that. We want things to be a bit different. And actually, so that's that slow, long burn of an arc progressing is it's too long for a sales pitch, and it doesn't fit the structure. So though that was the issue that I had, and I still see that today. And if I ask people, what types of story do you want to tell? A lot of people say, I want to tell success stories, really good success stories. Well, you do, but that's not the very first story you'd ever tell. You would never walk into a room and say, before we do anything else, I'd just like to tell you how we made somebody else's life better. We wouldn't do that.
No.
Lots of things happen before that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you mentioned something there. I've definitely seen this as well. It is, there is a change coming. And, well, it's already happening, I guess, and especially with like movies where you're starting to see the action, like in a James Bond movie. I think about some of the Daniel Craig ones. I can't remember which one it is, but he's driving that Aston Martin. He's being chased by Alfa Romeos under that tunnel. Can't remember which one it is, the second one that he did or something. But I remember needing a quick break after the first 10 minutes because it was so intense. There was no real build up to it. It was just action immediately. And that's just, again, because of our attention spans. We want... And that comes from our consumer world. We open up consumer apps and we're like, it's rapid. And when we come to business, they're slow and sluggish. We're get frustrated, right? Sometimes with demos, I teach some reps when they're doing a demo, let's say, economic buyers coming in early in the sales process. They don't want you to do this really slow build up. They haven't got the attention span. You mentioned there, I think it's 8.25 seconds. It's really short, right? So I sometimes say when you're doing your demo, if that situation presents itself, sometimes read the back of the book first.
Yeah.
Then, right? So start on the big outcome, the big reveal. Here's that insights that you've not been able to capture in the first 30 seconds. Hook them.
Yeah.
So hard they can't spit it out, and then go, John, is that what you're looking for? They go, yeah. They go, great. Let me show you how we got there.
Yeah, I completely agree. That is what a good hook will do. It alludes to this is what the ending could look like.
Yes. Little teaser.
But you've got to listen to me now to fit, so I can show you how to get there.
Yeah.
And that's what, and you're right. But I will say, if you really put a lot of effort into your sales presentation where you're going to give no capacity in the audience's cognitive load to check out and do something else, but you're going to keep them there for those 90 minutes, that's all exhausting for you and for them.
Yeah.
And that's why you can't constantly have this action all the time. Like you said, the James Bond, it backs off and then it gets a bit calm. Then you have the offbeat and it calms down for a moment. You almost do have to do that, but you can't let it get too relaxed. You've really got to keep it. And we know that audiences crave novelty. They crave novelty and variety. And I always explain a typical presentation sounds like this. You can just hear a fan or something whir in the background. That's what a lot of presentations are. They're just noise in the background that you tune out. Yes. However, if you're in an office and there was a fire alarm that goes off and it's like, fire, 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 warning, warning, evacuate, that grabs your attention. And that's the difference between something exciting happening in a presentation and just watching slides that are just rolling in the background and not actually doing anything. So it's how do you create that moment of it's like a burst of color? How do you grab and keep it? That's, for me, I think one of the things that we don't put enough emphasis on when we're planning. What am I going to do to make sure that this is novel? Because novelty will capture attention. Attention drives focus. Focus cements memory. So it starts by being novel. What can I do to ensure they're going to switch on and then listen, and then take them on that journey to ensure that the retrieval of this story afterwards is easy.
Yeah.
And unless they're listening and they're paying attention and you're cementing those memories by using these techniques up front, they're not going to be able to retell the story. It would be, yeah, it was interesting. You should have been there. Shame you couldn't make it.
Yeah, 100%. And that, what you're talking about there reminds me of, if I go back to 2017 when I was in AE at the time, I was in a new category technology company selling ABM. And we were a very early stage startup, so there was no inbound, there was no marketing. The CEO built the website and I was just doing outbound. And we got a pitch from Drift. I think they got acquired now by SalesLoft, the conversational marketing guys. And I remember the AE jumped. I still have the slide. I took a photo of it. I was that blown away by the way it was presented. And then I actually, for all of the teams that I've built, I actually then made my own version of it. And it was like an old way, new way, before after slide. But most of them suck that I see these days. But the delivery was unbelievable. So like the right-hand side, you couldn't see at the time, just the current state basically. And it was like, imagine you've got a business problem and you go to Google and you type in some kind of keyword and you open up the first 5 pages by right clicking. And they basically asked like, what have you guys bought recently? And I was on a call with my CEO and he said, I can't remember what it was. He said something and he said, right, so you probably went to Google. Is that right? He said, yes. He basically walked us through the story. And he said, when you opened up that tab, you thought, no, that's not for us. You close it. Next tab. Oh, this one's interesting. Book demo, 15 fields. I'm not filling in that. You closed that one. Next one, you filled it in. And then you filled it in. It took 3 days for an SDR to reach out. Then they had to qualify you. You just wanted to know about an integration and pricing before signing up. And it was a pretty crap experience.
Yeah.
Right. And he basically just took us through this story, this journey that we've been through recently to help us realize that process is clunky and we were actually forcing our customers through it.
Yeah.
And then he's like, hey, there's this new way. And we were so inspired at the end of it.
Actually, that's a good point. And all of the content that I use in my sessions, regardless of what type of session, they're all drawn by an artist. And so I explain this is what I'm the concept that I'm trying to articulate, and I just need a visual. And sometimes I'll sketch it terribly. Sometimes he'll sketch it and send it. Is that what I mean? And actually, to do that, we've actually got a piece of artwork drawn for that purpose. Okay. And it's a split screen, and it's the contrast stage where you have to have a quick look back as to what life was like and what life is like today, and then a quick flip to, but it could look like this. And that's the moment where you've got to do the quick reflection. And it may be like a 35-second piece of narrative, but it actually dips back quickly, shows them, and then comes back. So I'll send you the visual, and if you want to open it, then
amazing. Yeah, that'd be great. And I like, if you guys are listening, you don't follow Jon, go to LinkedIn, because I think I even saw one of your videos this morning where you was up on, I don't know if you posted this morning, but LinkedIn's doing that thing now where it's showing you stuff from 3 weeks ago. So it could have been a couple of weeks ago, but of you up on stage talking to, I guess, a group of sellers at an organization, and you were talking about something, and, there's just behind you is this big screen, and every now and then there's just like a wacky drawing on there, but it always grabs my attention in the newsfeed. So I can only imagine when you're using it in a sales conversation, again, it's gonna really pull people in. Is that?
Yes, the one. Yeah, that was today. That was about hooks, because I'd had a conversation with somebody about hooks, so I put the video about hooks. But you'll see that's the style of, and that was actually sales and marketing, that event, and is seeing those visuals on a 6-meter screen. They're stunning. Hats off to the artist who draws them. For me, does a great job. But that's part of the differentiation, right? And it's novel. Okay, there's that word again. Novelty, variety.
Yeah, we're tired of corporate boring content, right? Like people always think that, the higher you climb in the organization, they're like dragons and terrifying people. I always say to people, he's probably listening, but my partner's dad's a CEO of a big pharmaceutical company, huge business. And, he's been an SVP of, really big pharma companies. And, he wears a suit and tie to work every single day. But the weekend, he likes to sit on the sofa and watch Liverpool with a pint. In his decorator shorts. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're just normal people. Don't feel like we need this like super polished, piece of content. Like, we're just normal people. Bring your authentic self, tell the raw story. And if that person's genuinely in a state of pain and wants to get better, let's just hook them, and let's just keep them hooked.
Can I a couple of things off the back of that? The polished thing. Polished is often very, very often not the one that's remembered.
Yeah.
No, that's the first thing. So things look too polished, they don't look authentic, and they don't actually surprise and delight, and they don't actually get remembered. So I think reducing the polish is never a bad thing. That's for sure. And the second was I was going to go. The second piece, if the visuals are hard to process, then what happens is people spend more time trying to figure out what the visual is and not listening to you. And therefore, this is not right. There's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't do that, but also it's a lovely moment where in the masterclasses that I run, I show a slide. That's a very simple slide, but the message is very clear. You can understand it. And you think maybe that slide is good because it's clear, it's bold, it's got a statement on there, and you can understand it. However, what happens, everybody reads faster than I can actually deliver that message. So they can read it at their own pace. And I don't know when everybody's read it. But I know that they would have read it for the time I get to deliver it. So by the time I get to deliver it, it's then old news. So it's not an aha moment for them. So the second slide, I reduce the level even more to create an information gap. And it's like there's just one piece of information on there, and I stop. I move from one side of the room to the other. I'll wait till I have their attention, and then I deliver the message. And I can be in control of the pace, the volume, the tone, everything when it lands, and I can look for the response because I know they've heard it. And that's very, very different than most of the slides that I see in presentations do a very good job of being incredibly non-memorable.
Yeah, they're very clear. There's usually lots of really clear information on there. That's the danger, though. Sometimes, right?
This is the danger because this then becomes what is called a slide document, and a presentation. A document you can send ahead of time, and they can read it and understand it. They don't need you there. A presentation, you need to be there, and they need to look you in the eye, and they need to connect with you, and then you can add this rich narrative around it. And that's what we don't do enough of that. And that's what I see probably more than anything now.
Yeah,
there are a few simple tweaks you can do to fix that. I can share some of those in a few minutes if you're interested.
Yeah, 100%. And look, a little bit of a digress here, but I think it's relevant because we're both in this space. But I see these posts on LinkedIn of people posting their calendar, and it's back to back to back to back of sales conversations, and everyone's like, oh wow, my god, they're booking so many meetings. I'm like, there's no way you're doing proper pre-call planning and coming with a really great story for that customer situation. I have these everywhere when I'm doing discovery training. I print them off. They're just basically, if you can't see this because you're listening, they're pre-call planners. On the left is the call plan, and on the right is the critical information that I want to take away for summarizing. I could use Gong. We're a partner of Gong, and I've used Gong for a long time to do the note taking. But as you're talking, there's stuff I want to come back to, and I don't want to forget it because I'm a human being. But the pre-call plan in here, on the left-hand side, there's a whole section that says, what story am I telling? Because if I'm doing pre-call planning and I notice that John's the VP of sales for a manufacturing business that's got 1,750 people in the south of the UK, and I've got a great customer that's pretty close to that, I'm not going to tell my Salesforce story. I'm going to tell the story that John's going to really care about, but I need to be prepared. I need to be prepared, right? So as sales leaders, we need to be enabling our teams and giving them the space to go, hey.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's the space and the creative license and creative freedom to do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know about you, but I just don't see that. What I'm seeing is, well, when you're not on a call, be sending out thousands of emails or be blasting the phone apart, but not proper managing pipeline. I just don't see that much.
And I do wonder why very little planning goes into presentations now. I remember before pre-COVID, we'd spend a lot of time building the presentation, whiteboarding the flow. What does it look like? Who's going to take which slides, and really figuring out the message on each of these, and how we're going to switch from whiteboard to slide to demo and orchestrate this. And that's the moment the props come out, and the props serve this purpose. And I see less of that. It feels like, and I kind of hate myself every time I say this, because people buy from people. We know that. We know that relationships are a huge part of this. Yep. If somebody gives you a slide deck, there's nobody listening to this or watching this that will will confidently say they can pick up somebody else's slide deck and deliver it as good as the person that built it. You can't do it. None of us can. So what does that mean? Well, actually, it suppresses our personality, our charisma, our ability to connect in an authentic way with the audience, because we're trying to cookie cut from this person to this person to this person to this person. And what does that have? Is that going to work? No, of course it won't work. You need to be able to give people the space, the freedom to tell the story. Those decks are great for enabling across an organization, but the last part of that journey, when you're hiring salespeople who know how to sell a product or a service, they've got to be able to tell the story in their words.
100%. Yeah, and I just think, again, if you're a leader listening to this, like, make sure that this is part of your operating rhythm. I think part of the challenge is, John, and we won't spend too much time on this because people will probably drop off, but I just feel like they don't see much value in or understanding of the value of a really clever and perfect, like, in terms of like alignment in terms of that story. It's like with skill gaps. They know they've got skill gaps in their organization, but they'd rather, refresh their technology stack instead and hope that gets an extra 1%. It's like, just prioritize stuff that we all know is what's, causing the problem.
I'm completely, 100% with that. So I don't spend, 150 grand creating a pitch deck. Send everybody, give them all $1,000 and go and do some decent story training or presentation skills training, because that'll have a bigger impact.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, even if the slides aren't perfect, and if your branding team or your legal team, aren't happy with them, then who cares, right? They'll sell a hell of a lot more, and the finance team will be a hell of a lot happier. So, someone's going to be unhappy, someone's going to be very happy. So, but let's talk about reinforcement, because we spoke about a little bit earlier on about, differentiators are really important. We spoke about speed to differentiation. We've spoken about, stories and, different types of stories and how they're important at different parts of the sales process. I guess with your kind of enablement hat on, if there's an enablement person listening to this, or maybe a sales leader that's fairly new and doesn't really have the experience about running a program with their sellers, like, what advice would you have for people that want to implement storytelling, and how do they actually start to operationalize it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't overcomplicate it. Keep it really simple and break it down. The one that actually I think is probably, if you analyze this, there's probably been at least 6 mentions of hooks. You can break all of this stuff down. Okay, you haven't got to tackle it all at once. You haven't got to understand a positioning story structure and a success story structure and a discovery. So you haven't got to worry about it. You can just pick one off at a time. And if we pick off like the positioning story, let's work on hooks, which is why I created the curiosity card. I don't know whether you ended up with a set of cards or not.
Yeah, they're amazing. I love them.
So you got one card out of this pack is about hooks. That's what you do. It's a micro learning tool. You just focus on hooks for today. But you've got to implement it. You can't just, a one-off. You've got to put it in and tweak it until you enjoy delivering that hook, that you see the moment it connects. And the one I've used as an example over and over and over again, I think I may have mentioned it earlier on, is what if I can make your presentations over 1,000% more memorable? The figure is actually 1,160%, but that sounded ridiculous. So I've rounded it down to the nearest 1,000. Right, so just working on a hook that will connect, creates an information gap, puts a cheeky smile on your face, and there's a lot going on in that type of hook.
Yeah.
Nail that. Just know how to create a really good hook.
Yeah.
Maybe ditch the agenda slide. Send the agenda slide a few days ahead of the meeting, because that will save you the important 90 seconds that you actually need to connect with somebody in a room. So just break it down, and I think I've got numerous plans going into very varying amounts of detail. So over the next 40 days, these are the things that you should be working on, creating the hooks, just picking them off. And actually one of them, if you ever see lines like this in presentations that say, we help sellers reduce time by 38% a week, something like that, as vague as that. A lot of the time, we also think that storytelling needs to be this big, structured piece of work but it's not. It's a micro story. These are tiny little stories, tiny narratives that what we're trying to do, we're trying to deliver a narrative that connects with somebody, that actually illuminates their mind. Because if you say, we sell us 38% of their time during the week, you're right, maybe one vendor says 37, the other says 39, the other says 38 because they're quoting from the same report, blah, blah, blah. And I ask you to visualize that. What?
Yeah.
you can visualize it. So if I said our platform reduces admin time by 38% per rep per week by automating CRM updates, quote generation, and follow-up emails. Right. You see a lot of this. So what's happening? Well, this can be cultural. We heard somebody else say that, so I'm going to say it. This is what I want people to remember. But actually, if you deliver it that way, they're not likely to remember it because it's kind of conceptual. It's a bit abstract. You can't really visualize it at all. But if you wrap it in a slightly different way, and it says before using our platform, their reps were losing hours every week to CRM admin. So since rolling this out, they've cut that time by 38%, and Fridays look completely different than they did.
Yeah.
One rep told us, I'm done by 2 p.m. now. I call it my sales freedom button. Right? That's different.
Yeah.
It's very, but you've used different words in there. You've got a direct dialogue quote. There's a time frame. You know when it happened. There's a lot. And actually, what happens in there, you can actually start to visualize some of this. And then you've got dual encoding, which makes it last longer, which makes it more vivid. I think these are the things that we're not saying rip everything apart, but if you see a little statement on there, just create a narrative around it that gives it a more wholesome or rich feeling that people can visualize. We want their brain to light up with activity, not just in one ear out the other.
1,000,000%. And a couple of things I took from that, and maybe this is an action for some of the listeners if they want to see like the power of a hook. If you go to like YouTube and you go to like a really popular YouTube, it doesn't have to be in business, you'll see they do like a really powerful hook at the beginning, and then they get into the agenda. So yeah, send your agenda a couple of days before, with some content. I call them DTs, demo trailers, like teaser content to get hook people to come to the demo. But if you still want to do a live agenda recap just in case they missed the email, that's fine. But first, let's hook them deep. Yeah. Let's have that. And I call them like when I teach medic in sales organizations, I have a whole workshop on rewriting value statements from like where they like improve employee retention, which nobody really understands what you mean by that and by how much, to imagine if it read like, reduce voluntary attrition by 15% in the first 12 months by getting insights on flight risk employees. That's just, for me, just so much more of a hooky, valuable statement that features a metric. I'm now thinking, I need that, or there's no way you're doing it by 15% in 12 months. So like you said at the beginning of this episode, I want to listen to try and catch you out.
Yeah. So those pieces of information will only stick if they are completely different than everybody else's. If they're wildly massive, then people were like, well, that's unexpected. Yeah. Or through repetition. The easier way is to wrap it in something that actually makes it more enticing for them to listen. For the people who want to know, the difference is one is a semantic explanation and one's an episodic explanation. One is facts and knowledge and the other is human experience. That's what you're aiming for.
Yeah, 100%. And again, you mentioned earlier about the one card inside of a big pack of cards, which are amazing, by the way. And if you haven't got them, go grab them. I guess, John, what do they do? DM you? Is that the best place?
Just connect me on LinkedIn.
They are really good, and they're very high quality as well. But that whole concept is so important, like small, actionable, and reinforced. So again, one and done training doesn't work. Don't get your sellers onto a 60-minute Zoom call Monday morning and try and teach them everything. Like take a small thing, like how to write, do a workshop, like how to write a hook, and then come back and have people present that hook to the sales organization and get feedback. And then as a sales leader, like coach your reps throughout that week to reinforce the training and make sure it's showing up in sales conversations. Naturally, I'm going to say like reach out to John and have him come and do the workshop part. But anything that you're doing from a reinforcement training perspective, if it's not reinforced, don't bother doing it, because sellers, we're just going to forget that stuff. Like the forgetting curve research finds that we forget stuff really quick. So small, actionable, we do. Reinforce it.
There is something you can do, which is a really quick win for people in enablement, and you've got these LMS platforms. If you put the quiz before the training, it actually will reduce overconfidence, but also prime people for what they've got to look for.
Right. That's clever.
So they don't get to the end and then realize what they've got to look for and then go back frantically searching through 10 pages. They can see the answers up front, but they're not going to be able to answer them until they get to the end, but they know what they've got to look for.
Yeah.
And that actually will reinforce training or memory creation considerably.
1,000,000%. I know we're getting close on time, John. So I've got just two final questions for you that will hopefully help people walk away, with something fairly actionable or something at least just to think about. So you went back to like your earlier career. You mentioned that you've been doing this for 25, 30 years. So what advice would you have for John back 25, 30 years ago, knowing what you know now?
There are two things really. One, stop trying to be impressive. Stop trying to sound impressive. Tone it down a bit and worrying about how can you be remembered. The other is, for many, many years, I worried a lot about how I would be perceived and how people would, what they would think of me, and I would want to be very, very professional. But that isn't me. I kind of like, I like a bit of banter, a bit of a joke, and I like to poke fun at myself. And I should have embraced that, because I'm also a member of an organization called the Magic Circle. Some people won't have a clue what that is. Some people might. It's not the legal firms. It's the world's most exclusive magic organizations, and that's been a part of my life for years. So in recent years, I actually smashed these two worlds together. So I actually use magic to emphasize some of the points that I make it in the workshops. I should have just embraced these interests earlier and brought them in, because it kind of makes me different. And I should have done that. So anything that we've got different, anything skills that we can bring them in and embrace it and make it part, because then you become even more remembered.
Yeah, 100%. And look, if you feel a little bit like on the fence and maybe, how you've typically done things, I'm afraid the game's changing.
Yeah.
We won't go into it, but there's lots of challenges that buyers face now when it comes to wanting to bring in new vendors. I mean, most people are struggling to renew vendors, let alone bring in new. So they're resisting outreach and things like that. And they're not multi-threading because they don't want to waste other people's time in their business, because we don't know if this is going to get through. So the game has definitely changed. And I think you need to be way more creative and curious as well.
Yeah.
And that's where I don't think AI is going to help. We need to sometimes we do need to do the hard work to find an angle, build that hypothesis, figure out a way of cutting through the noise. And again, hooks and great stories are a really great vehicle for that, right?
Yeah.
So great. Okay, my last question is, where can people find you? And also, I think you've got a big kind of in-person session happening in September. Is that right? Maybe tell listeners a bit more about that.
Yeah. Thank you. So to date, all of my sessions have really been privately booked by sales teams and marketing teams. So we thought, let's start opening up with open enrollment to the public. So we're doing it. We've got the first one planned with people signed up already, thankfully, for the 18th of September in central London at a very, very unique venue. It is the Magic Circle headquarters.
Okay, cool.
So you get to step inside a world of magic and magic history, and learn about stories, different story structures, and the narratives that we wrap around. It's a full day workshop. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So details on my LinkedIn page. If anybody's interested or want to know a little bit more, connect to me, and even happy to jump on a session and take you through what the workshop will look like.
100%. And I'd also highly recommend getting a copy of the book. John was very kind to send me a copy and the curiosity cards, and didn't disappoint. Really, really valuable. There's no fluff, which drives me mad with a lot of books, is you got to kind of just open and go to halfway through the book to start getting to some of the good stuff. So frustrates me about reading, which I loved about John's, like straight into value. So it hooked me to keep reading. So check Jon out, follow him on LinkedIn, check out his open enrollment in-person stuff, but also just grab a copy of the book. It's it's a really helpful, it's almost like a playbook, right? It's like a rep can have it at their desk, open it up, ahead of a really big presentation, and use it to do some of that pre-call planning.
Exactly. The book was designed, wherever you open it, you should get a bit of value from that page.
Yeah, I love it. And also, I'd say it's not like 1,700 pages long and it takes ages to build up. It's like, 100 pages, something like that?
Yeah, 100 pages. Yeah.
That's perfect for me and probably for a lot of sellers. So, love it. Great conversation, Jon. I think we'll definitely come back and do some more, because I think we can get really deep into actually probably have a whole session alone just on one of the types of stories, telling your story or the customer story or a customer success story, and all the different types. So love that. And I hope everyone else listened, got some value from it today, and definitely go check Jon's LinkedIn out. And Jon, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you very much, James.